Hello, and welcome to my second cup of blueberry tea with Stuart John, a para rower and commentator who was in Lucerne, Switzerland earlier this year to commentate the Rowing World Cup. Stuart gets bored easily, which may explain why a 3-month trip to Europe ended up being 6 years on the continent, as a mixture of tour guide, hotel doorman, HR lackey, hostel receptionist, amongst other things. The highlights and memories of this adventure turned into a novel titled, In the Meantime, Kick Back, Relax, and Thank You for Travelling at. But I wanted to hear more for myself. So join us now for some further insight into the life of a tour guide and a para rower.
So, Stuart, thank you for joining me.
Fantastic to be
here with our blueberry tea.
Absolutely, it's a very nice blueberry tea.
Yes, we were supposed to be out doing the winter time trail this morning, out on Lake Burley Griffin, but 35 kilometres per hour in a single, not having a bar of it.
With about 35 mils of rain to go with it as well, or maybe not quite that much, but no, it would not be very pleasant. I would much rather be indoors on a day like today.
Well, also, just got to mention, state of origin.
Yeah, anyway.
So the Blues defeating the Maroons. How do you feel about that?
Anyway, that's all I have to say about that.
The boys gave it 110% though, didn't they?
110%, full credit to the boys. They played good and unfortunately, I just can't say it.
But how about the Raiders?
And they just managed to get up.
How?
With the missed conversion at the end from next to... You could have thrown it over the goalposts and the Warriors bloke missed it.
They keep us on our toes, don't they?
Oh, 100%. Well, I mean, I follow the Raiders and the Cowboys, and between the two of them, you would not want to put your life savings on either of those two clubs at the moment because chances are you're going to lose.
We'll see how we go for the rest of the season.
Yeah, exactly.
Alrighty, but I am super keen. I am travel hungry, and so I'm super keen to talk to you about going back a little while for your 6 years in the European continent as a tour guide.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. I mean, I first travelled to Europe in 2005, and the scary part is that is nearly 20 years ago. Yeah, the mental maths is starting to really hurt now because it seems like it was just yesterday. It was going to be a 3-month trip around Europe to go and see all the sites, get it out of my system. And then I guess the problem is when you're just absolutely travel addicted is that the more you see, the more you realise you still need to see, which means you better go back and all that kind of thing. And it was amazing that when I left to go on that trip, I had a job as a sports journalist and newspaper down in Cooma. I could have moved up, gone worked for the Canberra Times. It would have been just back up the road again where I went to uni. So a full career that was starting to go down the runway. And then all of a sudden it's just like, not doing that. I'm just going to go and sit at the front of a bus, talk rubbish on a microphone and listen to music all day.
And one of the things you did have was you had a certain song that would match the various places that you went to, right? How did that come about?
Yeah, well, it was just about having theme songs. So the company that I worked for was a hop-on, hop-off company. So we would, generally speaking, you could potentially only meet people once and sort of have them for a few hours from, say, Bruge to Amsterdam or Amsterdam to Berlin, or depending on what their travel plans were and what your work things were. So, and part of that, we also had like DVDs that were on. We had, and this is, again, mid-2000s, you had seat-back entertainment. So you could plug your headphones in and, you had one channel was a CD set that was set by the company. Another one was the DVD. Another one was an iPod or something like that we had going through. So you had 5 different channels that were on there. And so the end result of all that was that you couldn't really play music through the speakers. They didn't want you to do that because, then people would, if you didn't want to listen to the DVD, you didn't have to. If you didn't want to listen to the music, you didn't have to. So it was a case of, okay, well, how can I, liven things up. And I just asked the question, hey, can we play theme songs going through? So, and they said, yeah, absolutely. So going into Berlin would be another brick in the wall, Pink Floyd, or David Hasselhoff, Looking for Freedom, if you really wanted to go back to that whole thing. Barcelona was, Barcelona, Freddie Mercury. Going into Paris, you'd play something from the Moulin Rouge. And then there were just the absolute cheesy ones. So I think going into Amsterdam, I'd play the Reefer song. And then going into Rome, it would be Rome by the B-52s. And then going into Bern, it would be Disco Inferno, because the chorus was burn, baby, burn. And then, the driver and I would be up the front doing the full disco moves, and I'd get up to talk, and you'd just see people just absolutely losing their shit, going, what the hell is this? But it was about trying to make it fun on the buses, because some of the days were, anything up to 12 hours long. So if you're not having fun on it, then what's the point of spending all the money?
Yes, and you must be, as a tour guide, constantly switched on, right? It's not just for fun and games for you as the tour guide. So what's that like?
Yeah, well, you had to, number one, you had to be there half hour before departure time. So we would, in the mornings, you're generally leaving at 8 o'clock in the morning. So you had to be ready to go, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed at 7:30 in the morning. Not always bright-eyed and not always bushy-tailed, but you were generally, there at 7:30. You're checking people on, so you check their passports to make sure they could cross borders. You're checking their passes. If they were new, then you had to issue them with their passes. So you had all that kind of thing. Then at the start of the day, because we were hop on, hop off, similar to when you jump onto a plane, had to go through a safety spiel, had to talk about that. So the title of the book that I wrote, Kick Back, Relax, and Thank You for Traveling With Us At, was actually the last line of my safety spiel, which I had to do 1-2 times a day for 4 years and however long, kind of a thing. So we would do that. Then you would go up and down. Hey guys, any questions? Where are you going to? Do you need accommodation for where we're going? You've got to talk about the countries you're going into. So if you had a day where you were going multiple countries, if we were going Paris, Bruges, Amsterdam, you would talk about Belgium as you crossed over into Belgium. You would talk about Bruges, then you would talk about the Netherlands, and then you would talk about Amsterdam. So you had to know your stuff for all those different talks. You had to explain to people, because that particular sector, a lot of people were starting. So you had to explain, okay, this is not a traditional tour. This is hop on, hop off. You guys set your own things. You can stay for as long as you want. You can do whatever you want, but in the end, it's up to you as to what you do. We will give you advice. We will give you ideas based on our experiences. So yeah, and then at the end of the thing, you would sell excursions for walking tours, for bike tours, pub crawls. There was paragliding, that kind of thing in Switzerland, which was amazing. So you had all those kinds of things as well that you had to, go and do, be able to talk about. So yeah, it was quite a bit. And then at the end of the day, you had all your receipts that you had to put together, because when you went and saw the boss partway around the circuit, in Nice or in Lauterbrunnen, you would have to explain, okay, these are all the things, and tick it all off. And, it's because you're really an independent contractor kind of a thing. You've got that whole, you need to look after your paperwork. You need to make sure everything's good to go. So as that the company can justify all the costs, so as that, you've got all the receipts for anything that the drivers, if they needed to pay for something, then you had those receipts in there. So yeah, it was a fair amount to it. Some of the days where you had that, those really long days, you might have a lot of downtime, because there's only so many times you can sit there and fiddle around. So, but on those days, you were on the front of a bus going through Europe. You're seeing some amazing places that you wouldn't necessarily see otherwise. Some of it, like Western France, could be quite boring. It's quite flat. But also you're trying to get people excited about where they're going to as well. And at the end of the day, you were going to drive through Paris anyway. So what's not to love about that?
Yes. And I love hearing about Bruges in particular. So a few years ago, I actually did an intensive study in Maastricht in the Netherlands. And afterwards, a fellow student and I, we went to Bruges. And I remember staying in a hostel And at the top of a bunk bed together, we watched In Bruges whilst in Bruges. What are some good memories you have from Bruges?
Oh, look, I mean, on the topic of the movie In Bruges, my brother showed me that. And I'd already been there, like, I've been there. But the one thing, so I went to Bruges in 2005. I had days off there in 06, 07, 09, and I went there again in 2010. I've still never made it up the Belfort. Every single time I went to go up the Belfort, so in 2010 I went over and I was doing some video and some writing for them because I'd finished tour guiding, but I was, going around and doing a bit of that. So I went to go up and then I realised that the battery was dead on the video camera that they gave me. So I'm like, oh, God damn it. Another couple of times, it would be closed for, St. Bruges Day or something like that. And it was just every single time I went to go up there, it would be closed. And I'm just like, come on. But no, I mean, I got the chance to take some people. We did a winter markets tour there once when I was living in London. And so I got to take people down. We took the Eurostar down to Paris and then across to Brussels and then, I caught the train out to Bruges. I hadn't eaten all morning because I was running around, because we were on the train and not on the bus. Okay, guys, how's it going? I'm Stuart, what's it? And then, the first thing that they got us to do at the hostel was like, here is a 12% Christmas beer that you're all going to try and go, oh my goodness, this is going to end. But I mean, Bruges is such a stunning little town. Walking around there, there's I think there were 2 different bars that had 400 different types of beer. And one of them was on one of the main squares and another was off a main square, but sort of in behind. And it was this dark little place. And they had every type of beer that you could think of. And one of my favorites, is going to sound really weird, was a mustard beer. It actually went all right, oddly enough. But yeah, so it's just things like that. And then, the markets themselves were starting. I bought a coat there, that polar fleece coat that lasted me for about 10 years. Got rid of it just before I moved to Canberra again. So, because, you don't really need a polar fleece in Brisbane. They think they do, but they don't. But, so yeah, going down for that and seeing it when it was cold, and it was a little bit different. You had the Christmas markets there and all the mulled wine, and even just ordering the chips with mayonnaise, Fritz, and you go up, Fritz, alsjeblieft. Okay, sure. Would you like mayonnaise with that? Oh my goodness! And then you sit there eating your Fritz, and then because the Belgians, they've got Flemish. Basically Dutch, you've got French, you've got German and English that they all learn. So you're watching the guy in the fish and chip store just flick between 4 different languages and you're going, oh man, you suck so much.
Well, did you come across many language barriers as a tour guide?
Generally speaking, the people that we spoke to and the people that because we had set hostels, we had set places that we would go to, all that kind of thing. So in a lot of them, they recognised, so say some of the service stops, they wouldn't speak English, but they would recognise our company because we had the work shirts on, and you always made sure you knew the words, the phrase for driver and tour guide, because then you got free food, which was very, very important at some of those ones. So yeah, generally not. It's amazing how much of Europe you can go through without having to speak another language. It's very useful. I remember just saying on that Christmas markets tour in a taxi from Bruges train station to the hostel at the start of it, and can I get a receipt? Because I was speaking to the guy in English. Can I get a receipt? I go, dank u wel. He goes, spreekt u Nederlands? I go, nee. But if you can say a couple of words, and particularly places like Flanders and the Netherlands, even the Czech Republic, even knowing a couple of words, they sort of go, okay, you've made an effort. We understand why you don't get taught Dutch or Czech in Australian schools. But yeah, and we had to, as part of what we were doing, we had to teach people a few different key words. So you would do 1 through 5, water, beer, coffee, the important things. Hello, goodbye, please, thank you, all that kind of thing. So, yeah, you had to know a couple of different words, and I think the longer you stayed somewhere, the more that you would pick up on them. Which was really useful. But yeah, I actually know more French and Spanish now from Duolingo than I did, working over there full time.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. So what would be some other little experiences that really have stuck with you? For example, maybe in Finland, seeing the Northern Lights.
Yeah, that was amazing. It was just like this green sort of thing up in the sky, and you're going, oh, wow, how cool is this kind of a thing? Also in Finland, doing a Husky dog ride. We had these, I think it was 8 different dogs. One of our ones wasn't a Husky, but he was at the front. He was living his best life. So, but they are such beautiful dogs. And so you're on this sled. I had a girl who was on the front of the sled. She'd broken her arm, so she couldn't hold on. So I got to hold on. And you basically have to stand on a brake that's got some sharp bits on it that stick into the snow, and that's how you slow the dogs down. Because otherwise they're off. They're just racing through. And our dogs were quicker than the sleds in front. So I kept having to just gently stand on the brakes a little bit. Let's just slow this down. And on that trip as well, we did a snowmobile ride. And the hilarious thing I will ever do in my life was getting the rear end to kick out of a snowmobile, skid around a corner, and then just hoon off. I'm like, nobody's seen that. It's the one Larry thing I will ever do. Nobody got to see it, so you've just got to take my word for it. Things like that, and then playing Aussie rules for the Czech Republic in Vienna. We had days off that were randomly put in. So at the start of the season, you would have lots of days off. So we would go days off in Bruge, in Berlin, and then Vienna. And this was the start of 2007 season. And we got there, and the hostel was called Wombats because some Austrians had travelled to Australia, thought, what a great name. So this was like, the big Wombats in Vienna. And they had signs everywhere, Eastern European Aussie Rules Championships are on. And I'm sort of sitting there going, oh yeah, the shits and giggles, like, watching international Aussie rules, why not? And a couple of the boys that were on that bus were like, yeah, we'll go do that. I said, all right, cool, we'll go do that tomorrow. And then, if you guys want, we'll go into town. So we went to... So having a few drinks that night, and then at like 1 o'clock in the morning, one of the blokes said, Stuart, this is the captain of the Czech Aussie Rules team. Do you want to play Aussie Rules for the Czech Republic tomorrow? Yeah, I want to play Aussie Rules for the Czech Republic tomorrow. We celebrated our international call-ups by drinking more beer, which in hindsight may have been a mistake. But, it's the Czech national thing, so what do you do? So we got out to there were a couple of very hungover boys the next day. So we had, the captain was an Aussie expat. Then we had about 5 of us, I think, that had all been called up from the pub at 1 o'clock in the morning. Then there was like a couple of other expats, a random Czech guy that had sort of tagged along, and then a former women's basketball player for the Czech Republic was also there. So we played Finland, Austria, and Croatia. And I didn't kick a single goal. I had one where I had the lined up all ready to go, and then I'm just not very good at Aussie rules. Can't kick to save my life, which is a problem. And then at the end of that, I actually ended up great because it was on a soccer field. And then they had some extra poles that were sort of put up on the side, but it wasn't fully grassed. And so at one point I went over, grazed all down the lower part of my left leg, and looking at it going, yeah, it'll be fine, apply alcohol internally, it'll all work out. And then the next day it actually started swelling up. So the whole leg, and by the time we got to Munich a couple of days later, my left leg was the same width as the lower leg was the same width as my upper leg. And even some of the boys, and on the day off, I'd gone looking for antiseptic. I'd gone looking for a pharmacy. Everything in Austria is closed on a Sunday. So I couldn't find a pharmacy. Went back to the hostel. They're like, okay, they had some in their first aid kit. They had some stuff. But yeah, by the time I got to Munich, I'm like, got this leg that is just absolutely swollen the whole way down. I'm like, this is a problem. So I call up the hostel where we're going to, and I'm like, hey, just so you guys know, can you, when I get there, can you point me in the direction of a doctor? Because I'm an English-speaking doctor, because I'm going to need to go and see it. And then, yeah, so I went and saw the doctor, and I said, look, I've got a badly swollen leg. Either it's infected or I'm pregnant. He said, I think you're infected. And then, yeah, there was, it's going to sound really bad, but it was like your stereotypical highly attractive German nurse that had to put a tetanus booster and all the, injections into me so as that, to help the swelling go down. And then I was on antibiotics for about a week or so afterwards.
And all that comes from playing Aussie rules in Vienna.
Well, all that comes from being in the bar at 1 o'clock in the morning on your first night in Vienna. So yeah, no, but it's just, it was complete random stuff like that, these whole experiences that you can't plan for. You can't sort of sit there and go, I will be here on this day. There was another one where we're in Lauterbrunnen, in this beautiful, beautiful valley in the middle of Switzerland. Turned out to be Swiss National Day. So then we were on the roof of a thing, and there's fireworks going off all down the valley, and we're just sitting there with your mates, you're having a couple of cold ones, and just going, how good is this? Kind of a thing. And again, we certainly couldn't plan for it because our schedules could change from day to day. If somebody got sick, then you need to go over here, you need to do this. But yeah, it's kind of like, oh, how cool is this?
And were you always open to undertaking such new experiences? For example, if people would suggest something to you, would it always just be as simple as, yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, we've always had it, like growing up. Like, so I was born in Townsville. My mum's family lived in Brisbane. My dad's family lived in Mildura. So we were miles and miles away from anything. And then my first road trip was at 2 weeks old, where I was this teeny tiny little baby, absolutely swaddled because at the end of 1980, good car seats hadn't made it to Townsville. So basically, they had to swaddle me as a teeny tiny baby because there was no harness. So they just had their newborn teeny tiny bub swaddled in the middle of a Queensland summer with no air conditioning because it's 1980, and we drove from Townsville to Brisbane. And so my entire childhood was always just, we are going, to visit family. You had to travel a long way. And so it's always like, okay, cool. If somebody says, like, I won't always do things by myself. I do sometimes. If I'm in the mood and if I've got the coin and, I'll go for drives to completely random places. But if someone says, hey, do you want to come do X, Y, Z? Sure. No dramas. Like it's just because otherwise what are you going to do? You're going to sit around and be bored shitless. So it's just like, no, I'm going to go out and do all these things. And, it's because you'll never get those chances again.
Yeah. Well, how long would you have in the off season, and what sort of things did you get up to while you were in the off season, such as being a doorman at a 5-star hotel and brushing with celebrities?
Oh yeah, no, that was a fun one. So we had 6 months off. So the season went from May through to October. My first couple of years, I also had a UK work visa, so I went back to London and I lived in London for 6 months. And so the first time I went back, I really struggled to find work. And then, like the number 52 bus, 3 job offers came along at once. One was doing some temp office work. One was being in a wine bar, and one was being the doorman of a 5-star hotel in London, doing the night shift. So, yeah, it was... so I went out and did the doorman ones because you could get some really good tips. Like, I basically lived off the tips. You'd open doors and somebody would slip you a little bit of coin. There would be, if someone booked a taxi for Heathrow, you would call up a certain person who would then send other certain people out, and they would come up and shake hands with you, and there would be a £10 note in your hand, you know. So if you had 3 or 4 taxis booked for Heathrow in the morning, then you've made yourself 30 quid, easy as, plus, you know, sort of whatever else that people had. And then, yeah, it was, I remember there was a Burns Night celebration that was there, big Scottish celebration. And the key person that was there was Sir Paul McCartney, and it was just after he'd split from his second wife. And so when I got out the front, because I'd forgotten my work key to go in through the back door, when I got out the front, there were 50 paparazzi out the front. And you're sort of sitting there going, oh my goodness. So I got in, got dressed, stood out the front, you know, looking very da-da-da-da, and just staying out there. And all these paparazzi are hanging around. They're waiting for Paul. And so at one point, the boss sidles up to me, and she goes, all right, so Stuart, so just so you know, if you see a bunch of people on the other side of that door, I want you to just yank it open and hold it. Got it, boss. So I'm still standing there, you know, looking very prim and proper, and then I look around. I can see, you couldn't see who was behind the door, but you could see the silhouettes. So I'm looking out, right, that looks like a whole bunch of silhouettes. So I go to yank open the door, and as my hand reaches out to grab the door, all of a sudden you've got 50-odd paparazzi flashes, completing. I yank open the door, apparently standing there with this stupid look on my face, just going, what the fuck is going on here? They get Paul McCartney out. So they've got 2 blokes in front of him, and they're basically rugby scrumming him through the paparazzi. They get through the paparazzi. They go to put him in the car. Whoops, wrong car. Go to the next car. Put him into the right car. And as he drives off, we were down the laneway, and as he drives off, there's about 4 or 5 paparazzi running after him with their, you know, hands out, still trying to get photos of Sir Paul McCartney through the tinted glass of these things. And it was just absolutely insane. Most of the paparazzis left. There were about, I think, 5 to 10 that were left after that. So then you had like Ronan Keating was there, Ewan McGregor was there. You could tell when he was around because, yeah, every woman started drooling uncontrollably, and a few of the boys. But yeah, and it was just one of those ones again where it's just like, oh, this is insane. Like this if this is how the other half lives, then I'm not sweet with it at all. Like, but yeah, so you got to do that. There was a famous Russian figure skater that was there, and I had to try and help him connect to Wi-Fi, which I could normally do if it was, you know, this again was 2006, 2007. Not everyone knew how to connect their Wi-Fi. Normally, if it was in French or Spanish, I could, you know, have a pretty good idea. You know, it's when the entire keyboard is in Cyrillic, not a chance. And then he still tipped me 20 quid for going up and trying. So yeah, it was an absolutely insane thing. And then of course it turned out that the manager that I worked with for the most part was from Nambour in Queensland. So, and there was an Ashes series on, so we would be following the scores while we were working. Yeah, and now he's ended up at a hotel in Wagga, of all things, just moved there. So yeah, completely random. But then you're exposed to people. There are a lot of Eastern Europeans that have moved across after the EU expanded in 2005. So there are a lot of Poles, there are a lot of Lithuanians, that kind of thing. And it was just a real melange of people that were sort of all around, particularly on the night shift.
So you mentioned this former colleague that is now in Wagga of all places. Do you still keep in touch with people who were fellow tour guides, bus drivers, passengers of your tours? Yeah. I mean, one of my closest mates when I was working, he married one of the tour guides. So I think he'd been working for about 4 years and then met this Kiwi girl. So he was from South Africa, Portuguese passport. His parents were from Madeira. So they settled in New Zealand and got married over there, and you know, all of us sort of went around. So there was this massive, you know, amount of us that all went over to New Zealand and, you know, enjoyed that. And sort of as people got married, you went to all the different weddings. Yeah, so you still sort of keep in touch with people. I think that's where social media is really quite useful.
You can sort of see things and that kind of stuff. One of them got married and her entire family was staying in the hotel I was working at the time. So I had the day off work, so I just signed out one of the master keys and just went, rightio guys, anything you need, I can help you out here. And I need to go to here. So I'm just like, all right, let's go. And then for that particular wedding, they wanted someone from Brisbane to, they had hired a London taxi, like an actual London taxi, and they needed someone to drive it. So it's like, will you go and drive this London taxi? I'm like, hell yes, I will drive the London taxi for you. So yeah, I got to drive a London taxi around around Brisbane. Around Europe, that would have been cool.
That would have caught quite a bit of attention, I reckon.
Yeah, no. So it was very. I don't think I've ever driven quite so sensibly, because you've got a bride in the back who's obviously a little bit nervous about all these things, and got to make sure. And then we're leading, the other cars with the bridesmaids in it, but no, it was a very, very cool thing. But yeah, it was just one of those ones. It just so happened that a friend from tour guiding was going to be at the hotel, and so yeah, you sort of catch up and that kind of thing where you can. Not always with everyone, but you don't always get along with everyone anyway. But then some of the people that I met while travelling are some of my closest friends now.
Well, how did you decide, when was it time for you to come home?
I think it was, I got to 2009, I'd been doing it for 4 years, and I just wasn't quite the same. Like 2008, I'd had my absolute best season. I knew all the stuff. I knew what I was doing. I was ready for any challenges. And, I remember at the start of the season having the most charismatic driver and one of the most charismatic tour guides on the bus. And then I'm like, shit, I'm going to have to really pull finger and, to try and get ahead of these guys. So, or not get ahead of them, but, I'm the guide kind of a thing. So I was just in a really good spot. And then in my 4th year, it didn't quite have the same sort of thing. Like a lot of my friends had started to move on. We had some new people. And then I had some tours that just didn't, I had a Greek tour that was amazing. And then the next tour, there were some people on there that were just really hard work. And so I sort of didn't have that energy anymore. And then I had a tour where they oversold it in halfway through. So there was supposed to be 2 people getting off at Budapest, 2 people getting on. Instead, we had 5 people getting on. And at the time, I caught bed bugs from the hostel. So I'm scratching, I'm trying to wash all my clothes, I'm trying to do all the things that, I used to tell everyone, this is what you need to do if you get bed bugs. And of course, then I had to go and do it myself. And I was itching absolutely everywhere. I was feeling pretty sorry for myself. And then all of a sudden I had this scenario, and I just handled it so poorly. I just completely lost the tour. And then I was down on boats in the Croatia Islands, going through Croatia, which you would think would not be a particular issue, but it also didn't match up to the type of tour guide that I was. I wasn't I was the guy who could tell you the stories about the places. I wasn't necessarily the person who could deal with being around people for 24/7 on a boat. And again, some of the people that were on those boats were really hard work. They were there to party and cause havoc and all that kind of thing. And you had to balance that out against the people that weren't there to party. They were there to have a good time, but, it was just, I just really, really struggled with it. And I just went, at one point I ended up emailing the boss and just going, hey, I had to send something off. And I sent it off and I said, hey, look, get someone else down here. I'm not enjoying it. You're better off getting someone young and enthusiastic to come down here and to do it. Put me back on the main circuit, because that's where I do well, telling those stories. And so they put me onto a tour where there was a tour that had gone from Prague down to Split, and then the same guide was supposed to take them back up to Prague again. And instead, he got told a couple of days out because the boss came to the party. She's like, okay, cool. Sent me through a new schedule that included, you know, doing a couple of these tours and then going back on. Because she's like, you've been with us for 4 years. We know how awesome you are. You know, really did the right thing by me. The problem is that the guide was very upset because there were 3 very attractive young American girls that were on that trip that were going back up. And so he thought it was someone else that was going on. So, oh, bloody... And then he saw me and went, oh, shit. Like, you know, kind of a thing. He shouldn't have been mouthing off about any of us, really. But it meant I was sort of off on slightly the wrong foot to start with because they wanted this other guy because he was really, really charismatic, really lovely. The driver was just out to make money and to hook up with as many girls as he could. I was still feeling pretty sorry for myself, and that tour just went so badly. And it literally, you know, we were at the dinner at the end of the tour in Prague. Number one, people wouldn't give me their feedback forms. A few people did, because they were the people that I could speak to, because the driver was busy chatting to the pretty girls and to a couple of other things. And it's like, well, you can't have both of the staff only talking to the pretty girls. Like, you've got to, and, you know, you need to go around and chat to everyone anyway. And so at the dinner, you had this one woman in particular who was just sitting there. Well, I've already emailed the company and complained. And I'm like, I'm sitting right here. Like, you know, and at the end of the dinner, I'm just like, yeah, cool, no worries. And so the next day I got the feedback forms because they'd handed them all to the driver. And I got the driver's like, oh, I don't really want to give these to you. I'm like, mate, you got to give them to me. So the next day I've got a different driver. He's a good mate of mine. And I'm a lot more comfortable because I knew that he wasn't going to be quite as money focused or anything like that. And, you know, by this point, my confidence is just absolutely shot to shit. You know, I was now 29, or I was turning 29 at the end of the year. I'd sort of started this, we'd started the tour, it's a pretty friendly crew. We're going from Prague to Kutná Hora and then to Olomouc, where we were staying the night in the eastern part of the Czech Republic. And I got through all the initial stuff and then I read through these feedback forms. And I mean, some of it was ridiculous. Like, there was one girl that said, oh, you know, it was terrible, blah, 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 blah. But Stuart was well organised, very friendly, knew his stuff, you know, brought everyone together. And I'm like, what do you want? Like, you know, some of it was, okay, he could be a bit smug. And I was, you know, when I get stressful, I can very easily slip to sarcastic mode and, you know, just be an absolute dick when I put my mind to it. So that was a good sort of reminder, hey, you know, don't just come up with the quips and the smart-ass comments and that. But, you know, some of it was just really, really brutal. And I'm just sort of sitting there going, nah, I can't. This is rubbish. So I put them aside and we left Kutná Hora, which is the big bone church in the Czech Republic. You know, everything's decorated in human bones. It is insane. So we left it, and the next thing I had to do was do this talk about the revolutions of 1989. So again, remember, I'm better at telling stories, and I just went, because at that point, I was sort of thinking, I almost feel like just doing this tour and then just walking off. Like, I'm clearly can't do the job. People are spending thousands of dollars to do these things, and I clearly cannot do the job to the extent that people need. And so I got up to do this talk on 1989. I just went, right, if I'm going out on my terms. And I got up and I gave this talk, and just like, I knew all my shit. I was talking about the fall of the Berlin Wall and using things from people that I'd heard talk, and, you know, from over the years. It was just like, everything from over the years is just like, right, if I'm going out with a bang, kind of a thing. And at the end of it, I put down, and, you know, you could always tell when everyone was hanging on to every word you were saying. And I put the microphone down, and the driver's just turned, he's looked at me, he's just nodded and gone, wow, kind of a thing. And then, it's sort of, we had this guy, Randy, who was Canadian, lives in Texas now. And I caught up with him in Austin one time. He was a bit older and he came down, he started chatting, and all of a sudden you sort of realise, okay, cool, I do have this. And then that driver was really good because it was, number one, I said to him, we got to Olomouc and I said, hey mate, some feedback forms that are hidden in there, I want you to put them where I can't get to them, because I'm the kind of person who will keep looking at them and put myself in a bad mood. So put them where I can't find them, don't tell me where they are. That's all good. And then having him there as well, because later on that tour, we actually found out that the girl who ran the hostel bar in Athens, so I'd spent 2 months in Athens at the start of that season, and the girl who ran the hostel bar in Athens had fallen off the roof of that hostel. And so I got this phone call to say, from the main boss, to say that she had passed. And, you're sort of sitting there just going, fuck, and so I called up the boss of the tours that I was doing, and he's like, well, when are you going to know you're going to be okay? And he was just real, I think part of my issues were that I never felt like he trusted me, whereas the other guys did. And so, so we had that, and then it was just really, really useful because the driver was like, okay, mate, do you want me to take the people? I said, nah, look, I'll go. I think it'll be better rather than sitting, and sort of, it'd be better talking to people, and that will take my mind off things. But that was where he was really good, because he's like, he would go around and talk to all the different people, and, and we just had that vibe on the tour that made it go, okay, how good's this? And it sort of got me through to the end of the season. But then, after that whole experience, it's just like, okay, I don't want to, I can't do this anymore. I can't give it the enthusiasm. I don't always deal well with difficult people. And, the next year I was going to be 30. So I was like, okay, I've had some fun, I've gone off, I've done all these things. And it ended up being that the next year I got to, travel around and write and vlog for them. And so, and I realised I'd made the right choice. In that year, we went to, I was again with a good mate of mine, we left Český Krumlov, and so we were heading to Vienna. The bus broke down, and we pulled up at a servo, and of course a whole bunch of bullfeds who'd been told not to come back to the Czech Republic. They'd nearly been arrested, and then they started getting on the beers, and we didn't use the toilets on the bus. And I'm like, okay, we're going to be held up here for a while. We can get to, once the bus restarts, we can get to Vienna in one go. Like, this is what we should be doing. And I'm just like, no, I'm so glad I don't have to deal with these idiots. And that was it. It was just like, after 6 years on the road, it's like, okay, I need to come home. I need to do the things, settle down, and the whole plan was to come back home. Okay, 30s, wife, kids, mortgage, all that kind of stuff. None of which happened, but that's a whole different thing.
So it was time to come home. And was it just, well, you had spent, after you finished tour guiding, then you still spent another year on the road, and then it was time to come home. But then how soon after you came back home did you write your book about, or your memoirs of the tour guiding?
I only did it in 2020. It was, so in 2019, the end of 2019, I was turning 39, wasn't in great shape. I wasn't, I was in a job. I'd come back down to Canberra to work for Rowing ACT. And because I'd done an MBA in sports management, done a trip overseas, and then sort of came back. And, getting back to that whole thing, my 30s were supposed to be about the wife, the kids, the mortgage, all that kind of thing. And none of those things had happened. And so at the end of 2019, I was mentally in an absolutely atrocious place. Like I was at rock bottom and was still digging, kind of a thing. And so I realised, coming back from a trip back home to Brisbane, that I needed help. And so I'd sort of started to get help at the start of 2020 and sort of had started to improve and all that kind of thing. Then the pandemic hit, and so we suddenly found ourselves with a lot of time inside. And so one of my coping things, because I always live by myself, so I had a couple of coping things. One was to walk from Bruce to Braddon, which is about an hour one way, to go get coffee from a friend's cafe. So I'd chat with him and, head back again. And one of the other things was to write these short stories from my tour guide. Like, I'd always wanted to write about, I'm going to write a book. And then I never did. I'd write, a paragraph or a page, or I'd start something, and then I'd forget about it and it'd just go to shit. And so instead of writing a whole book, I was writing these short stories, which became the chapters. And it was an amazing thing for me because, I was recovering mentally, but it was also that reminder that because I'd put so much pressure on myself to have all the things done in my 30s that weren't going to happen. I think it was that reminder of, I was that person and there was no reason why I couldn't become that person again. Like it was always there. It had just been beaten down by, that's probably not the right phrase, but external things had meant that person wasn't sort of there. And it was just that reminder. It was just that whole, I need to remember that, I did all these things and it was amazing. And I had all these people that would come up and go, hey, you're my favourite guide, and all the people that I got to meet. And so it was a really massive part of the recovery from, mental health issues.
That's amazing that you did that. This is what helped you get through that. Had you made use of a journal when you were travelling, or how did you be able to capture these memories so well?
I just remember random stories. I can't remember people's names for love nor money, but I can remember stories, which I think helped as a tour guide. I could remember the stories. I could remember the way in which somebody told us the story about the Scottish guy telling us about the fall of the Berlin Wall in Berlin, where even the locals were standing around going, oh, yeah, I remember how this happens, yeah. So I can remember those kinds of things. And it was literally just, I think it was just little stories and little themes and going, okay, well, let's tell the story about playing Aussie rules for the Czech Republic. Let's tell the story about going to Finland on a trip. Let's tell X, Y, Z. And it was just, you'd write one and like, oh yeah, that reminds me of the time I did X. And oh, that reminds me of the time I did Y. Or even, the bits in between. There were... doing the work in the hotel in London, or, visa expiring and going around traveling across the US by train, all those kinds of different things. So I think it just it would spark memories back up, and, you'd start writing a couple of the really, really fun stuff. And then you'd go, oh yeah, that's right, I also did that. Oh, that's right, we also saw the very X-rated show on the bar in Porto. It's all those kinds of different things that it sparks up your memory a little bit. And, again, I think it really helps when you're in a pandemic and you're not allowed out of the house all that much. But yeah, it was just, I just tend to remember stories really, really well.
Yes, and that is what got you through the pandemic, and it really did help lift your spirits and get you back on track.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a combination of things. I think it was, going out and getting help. It was, which had sort of started that road to recovery. It was exercising more. That was about the time I started rowing at the end of 2019. So it was, when we were back allowed back out, going out and doing the rowing. I'd also had my car wrecked in the Canberra hailstorm in 2020, so I only had a bike. So I was cycling everywhere. So it was, it's the standard things. It's the exercise, it's the, seeking out social interactions. It's all that kind of thing, sort of all helping out there. And then, it's, like yourself, I trained as a journo at uni. I worked as a journo. And again, I love telling stories, and it just turned out, this is what's going to help me through.
That's awesome. Okay, we are going to take a quick break. We need to top up our tea, and we will be back momentarily. And welcome back. We are now with some peppermint tea and ready to talk about rowing. So that was also one of the things you mentioned that helped get you through back into good form. So what got you into rowing?
Well, I'd done an MBA in sports management when I was living in Brisbane, and the end of it was it was partly through Torrens University and partly through the Real Madrid Graduate School. And which is pretty much the main reason I did it, because one of the subjects was 2 weeks in Madrid for Semana Blanca, White Week. So all the Real Madrid graduates would come in. We spent a week at the Santiago Bernabeu in Madrid, watching over the they had all these people out to talk. So they had Rafa Nadal's Uncle Tony there, giving talks. They had the head of NBA Europe there. All the really big names that you would expect from Real Madrid, as well as watching the grounds, which was very therapeutic, watching the groundsmen go up and down mowing the grass on the things. So at the end of that, I'd tried to put together an online sports travel guide, so like Lonely Planet, but for sports. So if you went to Sydney, you could look it up and go, hey, there's a rugby union game, there's an Aussie rules game, have it all together, so you didn't have to look at, I want to go see some sport, what can I do, kind of a thing. And so I'd gone around and then realised that I had not set this whole thing up properly, and I was just spending way too much money. So applied for a job with Rowing ACT, and I got that as the executive officer. And after a year of watching it, I sort of went, you know what, I might give this a go. So learnt to row with ANU at the end of 2019, and then just sort of kept on doing that. It was when I was still working for Rowing ACT, it meant that I could go off and exercise. As a person with a physical disability, it meant that I was a para rower, which meant that I could go get classified, which I did. And then I sort of had it where I could, that we then started doing para races in the ACT, which they hadn't done before, that one person would be like entering and then nobody else would, and so on and so forth. So then there was a young fella, Cameron, who has an intellectual impairment, and he had been rowing for 5 years, but he'd never got to race at a regatta. And so I went, rightio, I'm going to learn how to row a single scull in 5 months or whatever it was, so that I can give this guy a race. So I just sort of started doing that, and then just, again, because of the mental health benefits of being outside, being in the sun, being around your mates and exercising, it meant that I just kept doing it. And it's been a really big part of my mental health strategy, because, things haven't always been peaches and cream since 2020. So it's been a really big part of that ever since. And it's literally just, let's just go out, go have a paddle and see how far I can go, or see what I can do, and just continually try and improve myself. Because, and it's very, I find it's it's very interesting because particularly where we're a university boat club, and you got all the young fellas that are coming through, and they're young and enthusiastic, and it's just like, oh mate, I'm in my early 40s. Like, I'm not going to be as quick as you, but gosh darn it, I'm going to make you work hard to get past me.
Yes. Well, so have you found it any barriers to overcome to get into the sport itself? Or is people with disabilities very welcomed, and can they progress quite well as they would hope?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things for me was going to ANU was because I knew the president, Nick Hunter, and he already had ideas about how I would be able to row, because my particular disability is in my hands. It means that holding on to the oars can be tricky. And the coaches and the people there have all been really, really good. It's like, okay, let's work with you. Let's see what we can do. Let's see how we can, get these things to go through. And then within the rowing community, the para community is absolutely amazing. Like going up to Sydney for regattas, and you get to meet and get to know all these other people. And we're all sort of, one of them had the best description of a disability. It's like, playing the game of life on the hard mode. And it's just sort of, we've all got these things that sort of, are different, because you've got visual impairments, you've got intellectual impairments, you've got other types of physical impairments, people with cerebral palsy, people who have had brain injuries or strokes, that kind of thing. But then you all get together and you all just absolutely, getting into it and going, okay, well, we're all in this together. And it's just a really fun group to be around. And it was, for me, it was bizarre, because getting classified as a para rower was the first time I had ever had anything official that said I had a disability.
What do you mean by that?
So I think so for the purposes, I should probably describe what I'm talking about. So on my right hand, I have my thumb and forefinger. My middle finger is about 2/3, and then my ring and pinky fingers are only up to about the first knuckle, and then on my left hand, all the fingers and the thumb are only up to the first knuckle. So on the scale of disabilities, it's not a lot. I'm not in a wheelchair. I can hold on to things. Don't get me to grab 3 drinks at a bar, because I'm not going to be able to do it without a tray. And monkey bars were my nemesis growing up. But it's sort of, because it's not a major one, like it's definitely an impairment, and under the description of the Act, it is a disability. But I think it was the first time that it was something official to say, yes, you have an impairment. Because with my particular one, there's not a lot of sports that I'm actually para in, and even in rowing, you're supposed to be missing 3 complete fingers to be classified as a para rower if you have a hand impairment. But when they did it all, they're like, okay, you are very clearly impaired. It's not 3 fingers, but, there is a very definite thing here that means that you cannot do it the same way that other people can. So yeah, it was just a cool thing to sort of have that and go, yeah, actually, I can say that, and because even playing cricket and trying to bowl spin or wicket keeping or catching or whatever else, it's kind of like I just had to, there's no acknowledgement of the fact. So for the rowing, it was really good, because it meant that I didn't have to try and keep up with all the young kids. It meant that there was that acknowledgement that it was going to take me a while to be able to go through and do things. And it also meant that when I travelled to take part in races, I was up against people that have, that their impairments means they go at a similar speed. So you're not getting flogged by everyone, by people who can roll their fingers and do all the things. It meant that I was with my own kind, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And is that part of why rowing is seen as a little bit of a cult, I think? We are insane. We get up at ridiculous hours of the morning and row in beautiful conditions, or maybe not so beautiful conditions, but it's something that we always stick to. So having this community, is that definitely what has helped you continue?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, you go to nationals and you're chatting to people, and even the people at the top end, you know, you've got guys like Nikki Ayres, who's a world champion in the double scull. Before my first race, she came up to me and said, "Hey, Stuart, go out, enjoy it, have fun. You know, really, really cool that you're there." Jed Olschwager, who's Nikki's partner in the double sculls, he's all, "Oh, mate, you know, so great to see you here," and da 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 da. And so even at the higher ends, you've still got that encouragement that's coming from those people. You know, Catherine Ross, who's been a multiple world champion in the PR2 category. You know, she always really friendly, willing to have a chat. So yeah, it's really that whole community of people. And then, you know, we all love it when we all get together in a boat, in a crew boat, and, you know, in a 4 and an 8 down at Head of the Yarra, and it's like, yes, we can do all the things as well. And again, we're racing against other people with similar experiences. We're not having to go up against the, you know, year 10 schoolboys that just, boom, they're off and racing kind of a thing. We've all got that shared bond, and it is such a cool thing.
That's amazing, having that unity. But then also in the rowing field, the journalist in you has stuck through it, and you do commentate at regattas, right?
Yeah, and that was all a complete accident. So I was coming up to 2020, coming up to the end of my time working for Rowing ACT, and we were running short of commentators. And so when I was studying journalism, I actually worked at a community radio station in Dixon, and we did the first ever live radio broadcast of an indoor cricket match. We commentated at the Prime Minister's 11 against England for radio commentary. Did some AFL stuff in the local competition, but I was absolute rubbish at that one. But I was also 20 years old and, just thought I knew everything, and it turned out, no, I did not. So they all knew that I'd spoken and that, I'd done work on radio. So it's like, okay, well, why don't you go down there and do it? And at the end of the first one, people are going, hey, this guy's actually pretty good. And so I'd get a text saying, hey, this is really good. Here's a couple of rowing terms you should probably know. I'm like, thank you. Yes, I kind of needed to know that. And it just all flowed on from there. So that was 2020. So I just kept commentating through 2020, 2021. And then in 2021, we had a cricket regatta on the Nepean River in Penrith. And I got introduced to one of the ladies, Lizzie Chapman, who's one of the top commentators in Australia. And she's like, yeah, we'll get you to, come commentate at Masters Champs. And then Masters Champs got moved from Sydney down to Adelaide. And so it meant that because this was also the first year they'd brought para single sculls into the interstate races at Masters. So there was Ian Cooper, who was a rower at ANU before going to Tonga. He was the man selected, but he couldn't make it to Adelaide. And so it meant that if I, at very short notice, could get myself to Adelaide, then I would have the opportunity to represent the ACT first. But then I also had our club president, Nick, going, yeah, stick your hand up, go and do a commentary thing, see if you can get a trial in with the commentators. So I put my hand up to volunteer, and they're like, okay, cool. And they said, oh, look, we'll put you in for an hour on the Saturday or something like that. And then thankfully I knew Ray Ebbett. I'd met him a couple of times before in my role as executive officer. And so he gave me a call and he said, look, mate, why don't we'll get you on air. We'll give you a trial straight off the bat. So this was on the Friday. And so I did it. And then they're like, oh, mate, we're keeping you on. And yeah, it's sort of, so I was working with Lizzie, I was working with Ray, Jerick Hasselgrove. And yeah, it was just really, really cool. And, and then the feedback I got from there was just, mate, don't want to blow smoke up your ass, but I've had a lot of people commenting on how good you are. And it's just, oh, how cool is this? I'd only been involved with rowing for 3 years, 2.5 years. And I'm commentating at a national regatta. and then, from that, it meant that in 2022, when Nationals went to Ngambia, I was part of the rowing commentary team, and, I've been part of that national thing ever since. And now it's sort of any regatta in Australia, every time I go up to Sydney, I'll stick my hand up, go sit up in the finish tower at the International Regatta Centre and, call the races coming down. Last few national titles, being able to call those ones. And it's great for me because I love doing the commentary, and it also is extra encouragement for training because, well, if I'm going to be down there to commentate, I may as well be down there and row in these events as well, these para events. And so, it just sort of all flowed on from there. It's, we spoke earlier about you just take those opportunities when they come and someone says, do you want to? The answer's nearly always yes. Do you want to go to Adelaide, represent the ACT and have a trial at commentating? Yes.
Good. It's having that courage as well in yourself to say, I don't know how it's going to go, but I want to do this, so let's go. That's really brave, such as going to Lucerne in Switzerland earlier this year, going overseas to commentate.
Yeah, well, it was, and again, it comes down to the feedback that people are giving you. I wouldn't have gone to Adelaide if I hadn't had Nick and a couple of other people going, you're really good at this, give it a go. So that encouragement that you've got through. And at the end of last year, there was a commentators workshop done by a couple of the people that have been commentating for World Rowing for the last 10, 15, however many years. And so they did this commentary thing, they did this workshop, and at the end of it, they said, okay, so we're going to give you an assignment. So here is a link to the 2019 Men's World Championship Single Sculls. We want you to commentate that from woe to go. And then we'll provide you with feedback. So I went through and it's cheating a little bit, but you do get to watch it through once and go, okay, and sort of have a bit of an idea in your head. And, then it's, trying to find out information about all the different rowers and sort of what their results were and all that kind of thing. And so I did that. And then the feedback that I got back was, there is very little I would change about this. Like, probably don't say the full names. Like, you can just say the surnames after you've introduced them. You don't always have to keep going, Oliver Zeidler, Sverre Nielsen, all that kind of thing. But, you got more excited and more excited. Like, everything was really, really good. So I sat on that for a while and then went, let's see. And I emailed back and said, look, thank you very much for that. I'm so stoked. Do you know, I'm thinking of going over to Europe next year. Would you know some people that I could potentially go and commentate at a regatta overseas? Like, for example, with World Rowing. It was very, very cheeky. So it's, and he got back to me and sort of passed it on to someone from World Rowing. World Rowing then sort of had a bit of a think about it and went, okay, look, can you send us through an audition tape? And then I said, look, here's the one I did for this thing, but I'm happy to go through. And they actually have a production team that are based in the UK. So they're really making sure that whoever's doing it, that they can commentate, that they're not, absolute muppets or, sounding rough as Darren Lockyer on the... making sure that everyone can understand what they're saying. And so, they sort of listened to that, came back and said, we're keen. Like, we can't pay for your flights, but we can offer a stipend. We can, which one do you want to do? Do you want to do Lucerne or Poznan? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I want to go to Lucerne. Because, one of the big things, Lucerne was actually one of our stops when I was a tour guide, but our stops were literally to drop people off, pick people up again. We were there for an hour at a time, and I'd never gone out and properly explore this beautiful Swiss city. And so, it's, so they went, yep, okay, cool. So I flew over, got there on the Thursday, and it was cold, it was wet, it was windy, and sort of walking, this stupid bloody thing. But it was really, really cool because it was a different way of commentating. So normally here in Canberra or wherever else, you're at the finish line and you're sort of looking down, and occasionally if you've got the live stream, then you'll call off that. With the world rowing stuff that I did, I was on a platform at the 1,000 metre line with a Swiss guy and an Irishman. So what would happen? Yeah, the Swiss, the Australian and the Irishman were all at a 1,000 metre mark in Lucerne. But we would sit so we were at the 1,000, so the commentators, and then there was an English commentator and a Swiss commentator that were at the finish. So they would introduce everyone, and then the Swiss guy would say some things in Swiss German. Then they would throw to us. So the Irish guy, Richie, he would do his bits, and that would generally be as the boats were sort of coming up towards us at the 1,000. The Swiss bloke would then do his thing, and then it would come to me. So I would go, okay, and da-da-da-da-da. By this point, though, a lot of the boats would have already gone past you. Quite often the boats would have gone past you. And so we actually had tablets, and you're looking down at the tablets and going, and it had the relative positions, so how far back from the leader you were, the speeds, the stroke rates. And you can see here the Australians now just upping their rate a little bit. They're up around 42 strokes per minute. They're getting a little bit of extra boat speed and they're able to get through. They're just starting to close that gap now. It's down to about a canvas between Australia and Great Britain. We're coming down to the 250. Let's hand over to Camilla at the finish line. And then she'd be able to take that through to the very end. So it was such a, it took a little bit of getting used to because, instead of seeing it and being able to call what's going on, you had to see it for a very short period of time and then sort of make judgment calls sort of based on what was, going on from there while calling it off a tablet for little icons going down. It wasn't even the actual rowers. So, but I mean, it's still like, holy wow. I apparently only go to Switzerland to talk on a microphone because I did that for 4 years and then I've gone back again, and it's to call the best rowers in the world going down a course. You're calling Ollie Zeidler, Caroline Florine, going down the course, the best para rowers. It was the first time para rowing had been part of the Lucerne Regatta as an official event. And it's just like, how good is this? And again, it's just sort of someone's just paying me to be here and talk rubbish on a microphone again.
About a sport that you love.
Yeah, absolutely. About a sport that I had no knowledge about until the end of 2018.
Yes, well, that's really exciting because, oh wow, literally at 42 strokes per minute?
Yeah. Oh, the 42. You had some of the sprints were in the high 40s strokes per minute.
Okay, I struggle at 32. That is a high rate for me.
That is some of them, and particularly in the sweep boats, you can really get those stroke rates right up there. But yeah, no, there was one sprint, I think it was a Spanish pair, and they were up around 50 or something insane like that, and they just flew. Again, because we couldn't see that finish, but I fair income. I've got to look back at the live stream because I reckon they would have had a flame, just burning rubber the whole way down that last 250 metres.
Were there any crabs ever?
Yes.
Really?
Yep.
They crab?
Yes.
How?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, this was the thing. So at the Tokyo Olympics, it's in the women's lightweight double sculls. The Dutch were leading and then crabbed with 20 metres to go. And I think they got bronze or may have even just missed out. In the Australian women's quad won bronze because another crew crabbed right at the very end. So, and even, it's a funny thing because we got to watch the boats as they were training before each session. And I remember seeing the British men's 8, and all three of us that were on this boat, we all commented, they just don't look switched on. the blade heights were a bit funky. Everything just seemed off. And you're like, number one, good, because next time I have a shit road, then, these guys, but it's also a reminder that they're also human. You're sort of, you're not always going to be at your absolute peak every single time. There are going to be times where you just, I know how to row. And, but yeah, but it was such an educational experience, being there and then just going, just how the hell do these people manage to get that boat to move so fast? And why are they all so tall?
Height helps.
Yeah, it does a wee bit.
Get the length. But for those who do not row, to catch a crab?
To catch a crab is where your blade gets caught under the water. So normally you're trying to get your blade out of the water, and then feather it so it's out perpendicular to the water. You feather it so that it's parallel to the water, and then you pop it back in. So if you catch a crab, then basically something's gone wrong with your stroke. The blade gets caught under the water, and then you quite often have to stop rowing to be able to get the blade back out and go again. So if you crab early on, you can make up the ground. But if you crab at the very end of a race, then that's your race done. And that's what they saw in Tokyo with a couple of the different events. And it's a reminder, everyone can crab.
Yeah. So do you see this as a start of a continuing journey to keep commentating? Maybe you might not continue rowing one day, not in the near future, but commentating, do you see that as something you always love to do?
I think so. I think for now in particular, it's sort of it's like anything. You've had that taste of it, and it's like, you know what? I did all right. The feedback that I got was really, really positive, and it's like, I want to keep doing this. I want to give it a go, and sort of as long as they'll keep having me, just keep trying, because I think they've got next year, for example, they've got World Cups in Varese in northern Italy, then in Lucerne again. Oh no, go back to Lucerne, terrible. And then World Championships are in Shanghai. So the opportunity to be able to go and do that. And then again, it's like, well, let's see where all this leads, because you never know where all this is going to lead. I was a journalist who went on holidays and became a tour guide. I was, at another point, I was a front desk person that asked very nicely to have another job. And then I started working in data, and now I work as a data analyst with the government. There is no rhyme nor reason behind anything that I have ever done in my life other than I'll give it a go. And so, it's just, I've had that taste, and let's just see what happens.
And combining three of your passions, telling stories, travelling and rowing. Not a shabby combination.
Look, it's there's definitely worse ways to go. It's a shame it's not one of those things you could actually make a career out of. But, there's so many different opportunities for commentators as well, because they've got, you've got the Henley Women's Regatta, you've got the Henley Royal Regatta, and if you can get onto one of those, then you're doing quite well. And it's also really important to be really good, I think, in any sport. If you've played that sport and if you participate in that sport at a really high level, then you have a natural kudos, you have a natural knowledge of how everything works and all that kind of thing. Whereas, for those of us that are just going in, flat, sort of had that journalistic training, then it does mean you've got to really work hard on everything. I think I was doing research before World Cup 2 for about a month and a half out. I was watching old videos from last year's World Championships. I was watching World Cup 1, watching the European Championships, painting a picture in my own mind as how these crews were going and what, they were expecting. Because if you look at the results, it'll tell you just straight numbers, but it doesn't tell you they were in the lead and then they crabbed, or they were doing this and then fatigue struck or pulled a hamstring or something like that. So it's really just sort of, was that person under pressure, and then he just sort of expanded it. So you sort of watch it. So it's a lot of research that goes into it. But yeah, also, how good is it when research is just watching sport?
And because, sport is something that you definitely don't enjoy watching.
No, 100% no. I don't know why I keep getting involved with it.
Stuart, thank you so much. This has been such a fun time. I've really loved catching up on your travels, and also because I'm a passionate rower myself, to hear about the commentating side of things and to hear all the different technique and how you can actually describe a race. Because sometimes people volunteer to come and watch, and I'm like, but why? Why would you want to do that? But then you can actually bring that to life, because even as you're telling me about it, I can visualize it, I can see it, and that's incredible. And it shows what a good storyteller you are as well.
Oh, thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
I love hearing about the shenanigans that people get up to when exploring abroad. It's like we challenge the universe to throw these exciting opportunities at us. So you can grab a copy of Stuart's book on Amazon, either on Kindle or hard copy, and have a better read of it. Otherwise, I will go and see who I'm going to hit up for the next cup of tea. Bye for now.